Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to modify this piece of geometry a little bit, because what we're going to be doing is doing what's called vertex painting. Now, a lot of people aren't aware of this, but I'm going to go in here in Max and over here on our utilities menu, and I'm going to get this channel info, and I'm going to open this up and talk about something here. This is like we're looking at the geometry. Now, we have a mapping coordinate that we can put on this, okay? But we also have vertex coordinates also. So we can apply bitmaps and materials to the surfaces, but we can also apply them to the vertices. And that's what we're going to do, is what's called vertex painting. Now, vertex painting, we need to have a set of vertices in here, okay, that's helping us, all right? We don't really have many vertices in here, so we can't do a lot of good vertex painting, okay? So what we're going to do is come in here and we're going to just subdivide this. Now, I can't use a normal subdivision modifier like a turbo smooth or a mesh smooth that'll eat this up. But what we can do is come in here and use one called a Quantify Mesh, and it will take this and it will add us extra vertices in here, okay? Now, I'm in 2017, and this works pretty well in 2017. And if you're in 2016 or 2015, Quantify Mesh, you see it's a mesh, doesn't like a poly, okay? So for this stage, you'll have to convert this to a mesh first, and then add your Quantify Mesh on it. Now, they fixed it in Max 2017, so you don't have to do this any longer, okay? Now, if I turn this down, it's going to make the polygons, the quads it's making, smaller. So we're going to go for something like about 2.0. And then this is going to give me a pretty good density of vertices that I can paint on, okay? And so at this point, I'm going to go ahead and convert this to an editable poly. Okay, so now we've given us something that we can paint with, okay? So what we're going to do here is we're going to go to Modify, and we're going to add a Vertex Paint modifier to this. This is a little utility in Max that allows us to actually paint on the vertices, okay? So this is a way that we can create a channel in which that we can kind of, instead of an occlusion which goes everywhere, this is a channel where we can tell things to only go in certain places, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the wireframe right now. Now, when we're painting on this, okay, if you click this first button right here, then this will show us the vertex channel, okay? We're going to want the second one, okay, and we're going to go ahead and fill this. So what we're going to do is get our fill button, and we're going to fill this with white. So right here, just fill this with white, okay? So this is all white. Now, the problem is we can't really see it very well. So if you click this second button, it adds the shading back on it. So I'm still looking at the vertex channel, but I've got the shading on it. Okay, so now I can come back in here and I can paint back on top of this with black. Now you'll see this brush is really big. Okay, and here's the opacity and here's the size of the brush. So I'm going to zero this out, and then I'm going to start bringing my brush up from there because I know I don't need it very big. Okay. And now what I can do is I'm starting to paint on this surface, okay? Now, all I'm doing is blocking, okay? I'm kind of, this is not a way to do a lot of detailed painting like I want to paint on the surface like in a painting program. This is where I'm just kind of blocking where I think I would have some breakup on the surface, okay? Now, a lot of times what I do is initially paint with this, okay? So we kind of go... And I'm just doing this really quick because you can always come back and work on this more later. Okay. And then a lot of times what I do is I'm going to go over here and hit this blur all button to just blur the whole thing. Now, the reason I do that is because we're going to be applying a bump, and the bump will work on the gray areas and the paint will show up in the black areas. So by blurring that, that's going to allow my bump to go out a little bit, which will cause the paint to look like it's puckering up before we get in here. And so then I can go back in here and paint back on top of this again, okay? Now, I know, and people kind of flip out when we first do this going, well, I don't have much control of this, and it's not looking right. You're not supposed to be. This is like blocking, okay? This is like when we're blocking in where we want things to be. And of course, I can always come back in here and I can change it to white, and I can come back on top of these, and paint back. Okay. Get this the way I want it. Okay. And you can always embed this in. Okay. Now, one of the things that throws people off is that if I go ahead and collapse this, I can just go ahead and collapse this in. Okay. So I'm going to convert it to Editable Poly. We're still seeing the vertex channel in here. So in other words, when I'm not seeing what's going to happen because this is not the surface, it's still the vertex. Okay. Now, if you do that, all you have to do is go in here to Object Properties here, and then you'll see our vertex channel right here that it's in our vertex channel. Okay. And so we want to change that to Map Channel, and now we're back. Actually, we want to change it to, not Map Channel, I'm sorry. So let's turn that back to Vertex Channel. And we just want to uncheck it right here. Uncheck Vertex Channel Display. And then we're back to seeing our shader as normal. Now, when I collapse it in, don't worry about it. I can get back to it. All I have to do is come back in here and put a Vertex Paint in here. And then when I turn this back on, I'm back to that. Okay, so I can collapse it in, but I can come back to it. Now, sometimes people ask me, well, is there any way to layer this? Okay, so I can have different channels. The answer to that is yes. Okay. By default, if you go over here in your channel box, you'll see that this says vertex color. That is Z0. Okay. So your channels have numbers 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so far. Vertex is 0, and that's a standard of any piece of mesh. That doesn't matter whether you're in 3D Max or Maya or whatever. Vertex color is always 0. But I can change this to a map channel. Okay, where I tell it I want a specific channel that I want to paint on. Okay, and so then I can come over here and I can turn it on to actually show a specific map channel too. So I can paint on different channels. I would tell you to always leave it on vertex for the first channel, but then later on, so I may be wanting to do this as a pass to show where the paint might show up, but then later I might want to do another pass where I want, say, scratches to show up. Okay. And remember, we're just painting on the vertices here, okay? So one of the things is when you're in here, always remember to turn these buttons off. Go back to here. That'll disable that so we don't see that, okay? All right, I was going to dump that off there because I've already got it on here. All right, so what's going to happen here is we're going to allow to use that channel, okay? So right now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put me a garbage shader on this real quick. So I'm going to come back to this standard shader. And the reason we're going to do that is I want to put a procedural texture in here to break up that vertex paint. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to use, let's use noise with this, though this is a procedural texture and there are many different procedural textures that we can use. So if I initially just come in here and render real quick, you'll barely probably see this procedural on here because by default it's really big. Okay, so I'm going to turn this down to say maybe 1. Let's look at that. Okay, now you'll see the patterns getting smaller. Okay, also I usually like to use fractal, and it breaks it up even a little more. Okay, and I think I want to go a little bit smaller, so I'm going to say maybe a 0.5. I can always adjust this later, but I'm going to go with something like that. And that looks pretty good. Okay, now the thing about procedural is it's very soft and gradient, and I want it to be a little harder edged. So we're going to do a thing called clamping. Okay, now the noise has an output built onto it. Not all procedurals have an output put on it. Like if I was going to go in here and actually get something like, say, smoke, which it's a pretty good one to use too, it doesn't have an output node. So I can't really do this, but I can because you can actually come in here and they actually have an output node. So even though the noise has an output node built into it, if I was going to use smoke, I run it through an output, and then there's our output node. So I can do that with the smoke also, okay? And you want to vary that. But the noise is what we're going to use now. So what we're going to do is we're going to go down here to this curve. Now, basically what this curve is doing is it's going from black to white, which is the gradient on the edge of these patterns on here, this fractal pattern. So what I want to do is enable this color map gradient, okay, and we're going to manipulate this. Now, you don't have to turn this clamp on, but if you do turn the clamp on, it limits this from 0 to 1, okay, which may be of benefit in certain places. So let's go ahead. We can add points. Basically, I want to go right here in the center and add 2 points on here is what I want to do, okay. Then I want to grab the one on the left, and I want it to come straight out, okay, and then the one on the right to come straight out from the white, and then have them right in front of each other, and it gives me a hard edge. And what that's going to do is, instead of this having a soft pattern, it's going to make it where it has a real hard pattern to it. Okay. Now, if I want more black, okay, then all I have to do is slide both of these points to the right, which is giving me more black. And we're just going to do a region render on this, kind of speed it up. Okay. And you'll see that's going to give me more black. Okay. And then sometimes maybe I want it to be more white. And so I go back the other way. I'm using my move tool here. And that's going to give me more of the white in those areas. Okay. All right, so here's where the magic comes in, okay? Now that I have this made, okay, what I can do is I can take this, take the noise and go into the black channel, the top channel, and I can add a vertex color in there, okay? So it's going to read this and tell it, okay, what's in the black. So in other words, wherever this black shows up, it's only going to show up where I painted with the vertex. And so it's going to limit it to only be putting it into the areas, let's render the whole thing here, where I painted that vertex paint in there, okay? And so you'll see that there's not a lot of it in there, okay? And that's because of my curve here. If I want more of it in there, then I swing this to the right, and that's going to give me more into where I painted. Okay. And then I can still come in. Maybe I want this to be a smaller breakup. So if I come back into our fractal and say, maybe I'll make this 0.3. That'll make the breakup be smaller. Okay, a smaller pattern on there. So you're trying to find where is the happy medium in there. Okay. All right, so now what we can do is we can come in here, and I'm going to get rid of this garbage shader now. I don't need that anymore. All I wanted was this node. Okay. And then this is the node. Okay. And we're going to say, call this metal / paint breakup. And it's going to go into our mix here. We're going to call this one metal / paint. Okay, and I'm going to unplug our dirt on there right now, so we just are going to go with these two. Okay, and then of course I need to apply that to our object. And then what that's going to do is give us, in those areas, then our metal's going to show through. Oops. Okay, we're getting that star pattern in there. That's one of these kind of, I think, a bug thing kind of a little bit. If we go back to our paint here, we used a template for this, and that template told it to use a map channel to do the anisotropic, and that's what's causing that. We need to turn this to automatic. It's the same thing I told you to do on the metal to turn that off, and that's what's causing that funky star pattern on there. So if we render again, that'll be off of there. And so now the metal is showing through with the attributes to the metal shader, and then the paint has got the attributes of the paint shader. Okay. Then another thing we can do in here is a pretty cool little thing is we want the paint to break up a little bit. So if we take this same shader and we put it into the bump on the paint shader, then what that's going to do is to break this up, and it's going to start giving me a bumpy area on the paint. Okay. Okay, let's get a little bit closer so we can see this. Closer on it. Okay. And then you'll barely see it. We need to crank that bump up a little bit. So its default is 0.3. Let's go for a 1 on that. And now it's going to start reading some of that gray area that we had in there, and it's going to start breaking up and causing the paint to pucker a little bit before it gets in here to where the metal is. So it'll seem like the paint is starting to have some like water spots, and then it's breaking up before we get in there to where the metal is showing through. Okay. All right. All right. Then what we can do is go ahead and put our dirt back on here. Okay. So we can come back in now. Let's go ahead and plug our dirt back into our diffuse, and we'll render again. And now that's going to come in and add dirt back on top of the paint. And I'm going to pause this while it's rendering. Okay, so now you can see it's added the dirt back into there on top of that. And so really quick with some procedural textures, we're able to get a nice breakup on the surface. And the nice thing about this procedural texture is this can be saved and used over and over and over again. Whereas, you know, if we're unwrapping in a custom bitmap, it can only be used once. Okay. Of course, this could be, all this can be baked in and unwrapped into a bitmap. Okay. We can convert this all to a bitmap, but it's a really quick way to really quickly be able to get some surfacing going on. Okay. All right. Hopefully that's helping you, and waiting for the next video. We're going to take this a little step further. Okay. Thank you.